and I was having a conversation with somebody who runs a sustainable school in Bali. And we were having a conversation around what is the value of a brand. And
what is the value of
A brand.
how do you value a brand, right? And where does that really show up? Does it ever get reflected in a balance sheet as a line item? And I think where we decided it actually shows up is in the way the business behaves on an everyday basis. And this sort of takes me back to your definition, Vijay, which is if we can go back to purpose, then it's very clear what the brand stands for. And a brand's value will be reaped in the way you're able to hire talent, the way you're able to keep talent, the way you're able to attract customers, the way customers stand behind you when there is a crisis, because your brand has lived up to that purpose repeatedly. And I really believe that a corporate's stand on certain issues has to come from there. Because when it is aligned with purpose, so just going back to the Facebook example of, is it the social glue that brings people together across the world? Then it's very easy to figure out the lapses in ad revenues. So one of the things that you're able to do on Facebook is you're able to target very carefully. And the algorithm sort of takes care of it for you, where certain messages are only broadcast to people
To a certain segment.
who believe the same philosophy
Absolutely.
or are like-minded
Yes.
individuals. They're almost walled gardens of different cultures and different nations. And it's possible for it to play out that way. But as a corporate, and I'll go back to an example of a Venezuelan rum brand we were working with. We had them launch in the US last year. They've been manufacturing rum for 200 years in Venezuela. Because Venezuela is a country that has had a very difficult past with crime and drugs and all of that, they've actually found a way to rehabilitate criminals, find a way to bring ex-convicts into their fields and their factories, make them into bartenders, make them into brand ambassadors, find them lives in the US where they've now become brand ambassadors for the brand. If this is what the brand focuses on, it's something that ties in very neatly with their HR policies, with their marketing policies, and with what the brand is looking to do in the future. And it's very clear about, hey, this is why we exist. This is our purpose. It ties into their existence, both in Venezuela as well as now their new market in the US. So I think that is, if corporate activism stays there, then of course you will find the benefits of that in your P&L. It just won't be a line item.
And I think this Venezuelan example is perfect, because if you were to look at it from an outside, it would be corporate activism.
Right,
because you're actually bringing and changing everything. I think sometimes activism is also just one, I'm going to just add one line to it, is our expression of how we express it. So if there's a negative connotation, then it's activism. The question is, can you still be transformative without necessarily using the word activism?
Yeah.
When
I look at, for me, when you say activism, I think it links back to a cause, right? And if the cause is, like you said, rehabilitating ex-convicts, or you talked about ESG, right? This whole gamut of ESG, diversity, etc. I think there's some great examples. For example, the one that I like is like Benetton has been fighting against apartheid for the longest time, right? And they've been very consistent. So it's linked to them. I mean, their brand is built and linked up to that. They're very consistent. They have a belief, they have a cause, and they're doing it and they're working on it, right? The challenge really comes in my mind in two places. One is where we have larger than life leaders whose personal views and opinions get tagged as the organization's views and opinions. You asked a question. If a leader stands up and says, is it the leader's view or is it the organization's view? Now, in any company, most companies, the leader's view becomes the organization's view, unfortunately. Now, sometimes leaders are sensitive enough to make sure that they are aligned with the purpose, with everybody in the group, with everybody in the, and they aligned and saying, okay, we want to be committed to diversity. We want to be committed to women upliftment. And as a company, it's decided, linked to the purpose, linked to the brand, or just linked to a cause, saying, okay, this is our way of giving back to society. I'm not calling it CSR, but just a genuine cause where some people say, okay, I need to give back to the environment. So, this whole carbon offset thing, this whole carbon, net carbon zero goals, right? Maybe it's a way of the corporate saying, okay, I have a role to play, but it's all decided by not an individual leader, but by a group, right? So, and that is fine. Now, the challenge happens when, let's say, Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk's view may not be what the view of Twitter, or maybe not Twitter, X is today. Right? And Elon Musk has his very strong views. It has created huge business issues and other challenges on X as a platform. But then he becomes a larger than life. So I think we need to be a little cautious, and that's where I believe that we need to draw the line. The challenge, and this is where maybe I'm going back, you talked about trying to draw the middle line in places where there's a controversy. But as a global company, we do business in 160 countries. We ship maybe, I don't know, almost about 20 million devices a quarter, right, reaching to millions of customers. There are places where your customers, your purpose, everything gets tested. When you have to, your customers expect you to take a stance. Your employees expect you to take a stance. And so what do? Now, if it comes to religion, politics, it's very easy to not take a stance. Let's take the recent one, right? There are two conflicts happening in the world right now. And companies are expected to take a stance. Now, so the way companies reacted were very different. Look at the way McDonald's reacted to the Russian-Ukraine war. They pulled out of it. They were very clear, right? But it impacted their business. But they said, you know what? Some causes are bigger than the business. This is true to our corporate brand philosophy, ethos, etc. So we move out. Starbucks, on the other hand, did not react. And I know many customers who then said, okay, I will not do Starbucks again. They just reacted to it. So in some of these places, it becomes a little more challenging, a little more difficult, and then it actually becomes a bit of an activism as well. I mean, all that's happening with the universities in the US of late, exactly, right? The universities are trying to take a neutral stance, but their students are saying, you cannot take a neutral stance. You have to take a stance.
You know what, let me tell you a story on that conflict, which impacted in 200 countries I operate. We have technology, algorithm teams, different AI teams across in Russia, Ukraine,
Israel,
everywhere. I have a pretty decent team in Israel. I'm talking about just about a year back story. We were facing attrition. When all of the entire Twitter and Facebook and Microsoft optimizations were going on.
talent dumping.
And rather than a first name employee ID was prioritized. I think one of the darkest phases consumer tech has seen. We also were facing attrition. Typically, marketing attrition, sales attrition you can handle, of course, because you can get a better guy or you can experiment with somebody getting elevated. But if you have a neural network team who is subject matter experts, it's not that every morning I wake up and I go to Bangalore and Koramangala and I can deploy 150 neural network engineers, right? We had a big, large team in Ukraine. And all of these guys were working through that conflict about a year, 14 months back. And 3 of my young colleagues were in a Teams call and they said, bombing's happening. We have to drive 30 miles away to the nearest Wi-Fi zone we have, and then we will log in. We were having more than 12 to 13% attrition in that phase before. How it converted into a positive mode of activism is, we all were aware that these 3 young kids probably would have lost their lives, their families, but they drove all the way, logged into Zoom, and still deployed and joined a conversation, and deployments or XYZ happens. What I did was, I said, let's have a town hall and just see, this is a resilience story. I said this is a resilience story. It became an activism story of positive activism, saying that people who are naysayers and had taken a stance on that war, the American team, the British team, suddenly said, if these guys can, and there was a cloud of noise over the next 2-3 weeks, which led to saying, no, we're going to see this conflict. So whenever you have a global team, one of these conflicts impacts the whole organization. And what we realized was, believe you me, the next 12 months we are at 2.8 attrition. They all worked together, just wanting to be with each other, which were completely organic, non-orchestrated, and that ended up becoming a positive activism in parlance of a corporate tech world, influencing the brand and dropping attrition. Now, in other parlance, you can put a different dimension and voice it out differently. But I would take that as a positive, which came out.
Yeah, see, the thing is, it's a great example, right? And it works very well within the internal walls of the company. Somebody said, you talk to 500 people. You only said, talk to 500 people, it's different on a town hall. You talk to 50 million customers, then that is activism, right? Then your stance has to be different. So what we do as a company, maybe we can take a middle line and say that, yeah, we have to be realistic, we have to be practical. What is our purpose? We are not here to take sides in a war. But when you talk to customers, and it then becomes a challenge. So, and unfortunately, there are companies which kind of do this moment marketing or try to take advantage of it.